Welcome to COS at 150, the city's sesquicentennial exhibit brought to you by the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. My name is Leah Davis-Witherow, and I'm the museum's curator of history. This important exhibit uses 150 artifacts to examine 150 stories exploring 150 years of Colorado Springs' rich, complex, and diverse history. Join my colleagues and I as we take you behind the scenes and show you how the exhibit was developed. We're also going to share some of our favorite stories with you and talk about why this exhibit matters. For starters, let's begin with this beautiful portrait of General William Jackson Palmer, our community's founder. Together, we're going to consider where we've been in the past and where we might want to go in the future as a community. COS at 150 contains 150 artifacts telling 150 stories. Some of them are large and some of them are quite small, and that's all purposeful. We want our visitors to pay close attention to each and every artifact so they're all in individual vitrines, because although they're organized by decade, each story stands alone. In putting together the COS at 150 exhibit, an important consideration was how visitors are going to interact with the artifacts in the gallery. CSPM exhibit designer Kelly O'Hara created a linear path that visitors can follow, although there's so much choice and freedom to move from case to case, decade to decade, and artifact to artifact. But in the end, the goal is that visitors will move along the linear timeline of Colorado Springs history from 1871 to the present. You may be wondering how we chose the 150 stories to be included in COS at 150, and the truth was, it was difficult. Because Colorado Springs history is so rich, so complex, and so interesting. We began by reading books, and then we looked into our collections deeply, into our archival sources, into our artifact collections. We had conversations with the community, and we asked for your input. Most importantly, we listened. What do you want to know about Colorado Springs history?
Hi, my name's Hillary Mannion. I'm the archivist at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. Lulu Pollard was a central figure in the founding of the Negro Historical Association of Colorado Springs, or NHACS, in 1982. She served as the association's president for over 20 years. In 1996, in her oral history, Pollard retells her childhood in Colorado Springs, her civil service career, and returning to the city after her retirement. We are using an audio spotlight to share Pollard's story with you in the exhibit. It works just as the name implies. The speaker above sends down a sound beam similar to a spotlight. By standing under this speaker, you will hear Pollard recall the founding of NHACS. It is as if she is standing in the exhibit hall with you, telling you about the beginning of this important association as only she could, because she was there.
So that's the way we started out. Mm-hmm. And Leonard and I were busy. Leonard was around taking pictures, and we were preparing homemade posters. Mm-hmm. And we would put them up, you know. Mm-hmm. But then Rita Sutherland, she helped us quite a bit in putting up exhibits. For quite some time, she was with us.
In April 2006, the first gay men's choir of the city held their debut performance at the First Congregational Church. In 2020, Guy McPherson, a founding member of Out Loud, the Colorado Springs Men's Chorus, conducted an oral history with the museum's curator, Leah Davis-Witherow. Mr. McPherson also donated materials from the group, including a banner and a signed poster from the performance, along with newspaper clippings. These are very powerful objects in telling this important story. However, the most powerful bit to me was hearing the sound recording of this first concert, hearing the 22 voices joined together. This is what really drove the point home. It brought me to tears and made me smile. It gave me goosebumps. The music, hearing the music, is what made me understand the importance of the group and the community and healing that they bring to the Pikes Peak region through their music. When you visit the COS at 150 exhibit, make sure to look for this display of colorful ties to hear the uplifting voices of Out Loud. Both of these sound recordings were collected within the past 25 years, and they underlie the importance of collecting the history of today. They demonstrate that our voices together create the history of our community and that everyone's voice is important.
This artifact tells a powerful story. As a 7th grader at South Junior High School, Raymond Alvarado began attending the Colorado Springs Boys Club after school. There, he did homework, participated in sports activities, and learned new skills, including the skill of woodworking. He built this beautiful cabinet years later, almost as an artifact of remembrance or appreciation for club director Tom Ho. Tom Ho was a young, ambitious advocate who believed in education and mentorship for the young men in Colorado Springs. Ho was an outstanding example of someone who did everything he could to uplift other people. Raymond Alvarado later built this cabinet and even volunteered in the woodworking shops of the Boys Club, bringing it full circle. In 1954, the site selection committee for a future Air Force Academy was deadlocked. Colorado Springs was competing against communities across the country, including Alton, Illinois, and Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. But the committee couldn't come to a decision, like a lot of committees, and they needed one more look. So 3 members came out to Colorado Springs and drove around the proposed site. But they wanted to see how the runways would work and where they might be located. So they headed over to Pine Valley Airport to rent a plane. There they were met by a hard-boiled, rough-around-the-edges manager who asked the general, one of the committee members, if he had a pilot's license or could fly a plane. And the general answered, "I think I can fly." When asked, "Do you have a license?" "I have a license." "All right, I'm going to need to see your paperwork. Come into my office." So the 3 committee members headed into the manager's office. He sat behind the desk, and the general approached him. He opened his wallet, and Charles Lindbergh took out over a dozen licenses, all with his photograph, in front of the amazed manager. Needless to say, Charles Lindbergh got the plane, and Colorado Springs got the Air Force Academy. This fabulous architectural element was from the former Burns Theater. Eventually, it became the Chief Theater, and unfortunately, it was torn down. Its creator, Jimmy Burns, was a Cripple Creek mining millionaire who was one of a kind. Instead of prohibiting his mine workers from unionizing, Jimmy Burns actually encouraged it, and it didn't make him popular with other mine owners in Colorado Springs. Jimmy Burns was also incredibly generous. He wanted to give back to this community, so he created the biggest, the boldest, the most beautiful theater this side of the Mississippi River. On opening night, May 8th, 1912, it's said that everybody in Colorado Springs was in attendance in their finest clothing, and they gave Jimmy Burns a standing ovation. That night, he was the most popular man in town.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Sharp, and I'm the registrar at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. This exhibit features artifacts collected in every decade of the museum's collection history, for some of the first 1,000 artifacts collected by the museum to ones collected just this year. One of the older pieces in the collection is this bird taxidermy donated to the museum in 1939. Jessie Aiken actually donated this piece, and it was made by her brother Charles Aiken, who is a local ornithologist who operated the first museum in Colorado Springs. Years of care by museum staff, both in terms of making sure it was preserved, but also making sure that it retained its provenance, have led it to be able to be displayed in this exhibit. It's actually remarkable that it's in such good condition, considering it likely dates to 1900. One of my favorite surprises while looking for artifacts to suggest for this exhibit was this rodeo queen outfit. I was looking in one of our special storage areas and found a box that was labeled Rodeo Queen. I was intrigued, so I opened the box and found this vest and divided skirt with belt that was worn by Dawn Norris when she was only 19 years old. This was in 1922, so this textile is actually almost 100 years old. is in remarkable condition considering it's almost 100 years old, and a lot of this is due to staff care. For years, this has actually been in a special climate-controlled storage space with environmental conditions monitored by staff. Staff have also taken the time to make sure to put it in a special textile box and wrap it in acid-free tissue. Because of this, we're able to help share it in the exhibit due to this amount of staff care. The exhibit also features a lot of artifacts that have been collected in just the past 10 years. Some of these materials are from the late 1800s, such as the first banknote from the Exchange National Bank. But many of these document the more recent history of Colorado Springs from 1950s to today. We have been very actively working to collect this time period, as the people who lived through it are still alive today. These materials document a very important time period in the city's growth and one that we need to represent in the museum's collections. Some of the more recent donations speak to the diversity of the Colorado Springs community. This Charo outfit was worn by Victor Ornelas when he was 4 years old. He wore it in the 1958 and 1959 La Fiesta Bonita celebrations. La Fiesta Bonita was a 3-day event held in downtown Colorado Springs, and it was the first formal celebration of Mexican culture in Colorado. This is such a neat artifact as it is from La Fiesta Bonita, and it's also just sweet because it was worn by a child. We are very excited to be able to preserve the history of La Fiesta Bonita and of course this artifact for years to come. None of this exhibit would have been possible without the generous donations that the museum receives from individuals and organizations. Donations from the community allow us to help share these stories as well as preserve local history through collections. We have been honored to be able to serve this community in this way for over 100 years and hope to be able to do so for many years to come. We want to encourage people to continue to share their stories with us and help us preserve Colorado Springs history.
Hi, I'm Matt Mayberry, Director of the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. As you've seen, the exhibit COS at 150 uses 150 artifacts, documents, and photographs to tell the stories of the individuals, businesses, organizations, events, and trends that have helped to shape this community. By exploring this, we hope you'll think about how Colorado Springs became the community that we are today and what path we'll follow as we move into the future. Just think about it. When Colorado Springs celebrated its centennial in the 1970s, there were no personal computers, there were no cell phones, and Colorado Springs wasn't home to the Olympic movement. We also know from studying history that Colorado Springs has experienced both good times and bad. We've had fires and floods. We've seen the end of a gold mining boom. We've experienced the Great Depression as well as the Great Recession, and many other calamities, both man-made and natural. As we commemorate this sesquicentennial, Colorado Springs is going through new challenges, perhaps most notably the COVID-19 pandemic, and the countless impacts it has on families, businesses, the community, and our economy. The actions we take during this time are making history that will be remembered in the future. We must never think of history just in the past tense. Despite the challenges of the past year, Colorado Springs has proven itself to be resilient and prepared for the future. The community will continue to pursue the vision of General William Jackson Palmer that this should be a uniquely attractive place. We are not just a commercial crossroads, not just a city built by fortune seekers, but a community that embraces the challenge to continue, in the words of Mayor John Suthers, to build a city that matches its scenery, a shining city at the foot of a great mountain.